Back to Talk Time with Michael Prebush. On today's show, our special guests are Tymeric Nelson, Cal Kogis, and Colton Ryan. Today's topic, we will be discussing how sports affect society and the various aspects that they have throughout today's country. Welcome back to Talk Time with Michael Prebush. So guys, starting off today's show, I feel like we could talk about a recent topic that kind of applies to us all in one way or another. Recently, the Northwestern's football team decided they would try to unionize college football, arguing that college football players should be paid because of all the revenue that the school brings in, and more specifically the athletic department, the millions and millions of dollars each school will get from football, that they should be getting a share of that saying that they do all the work, this, that, and the other thing. What's your take on that, Ty?
Well, I disagree strongly with that. They're getting their education paid for, and most people don't get that opportunity. They come out of college with thousands of dollars in debt, so I just feel like that's unfair. They shouldn't get paid. They're going to college and doing something they love, and that should be enough.
Cal?
I do feel that this is it's a money-making business, and you have to treat it as such. And they are employees, since they're the ones doing the legwork in the whole program. People come to see them. So they really are employees of the whole scheme of things, and they should have the same rights as employees.
Mr. Ryan, your thoughts?
Mr. Prebush, I agree with what Ty was saying about how they shouldn't be paid. They're getting their education at a very good, almost to no cost for most athletes. But on the other hand, though, playing a college sport is almost like a full-time job. Everything about it. You wake up early in the morning, you weight train, then you practice, and then you do your schoolwork too, and the schedule is basically run like a full-time job. And I feel like as a result of that, college athletes should get some sort of compensation.
I suppose my take on this whole thing is I'm somewhere in the middle. If a university decides to sell like player jerseys with their name on the back, then a portion of that profit should go to the player. Or with like NCAA video games that recently stopped being manufactured because of this issue, because college players rightfully so argued that the likeness in that game, it's them. Without them there would be no game. So therefore they should be getting a portion of it, because it was arguably a very successful video game prior to it being disbanded by EA. But another portion of me agrees with Ty. That most kids, when they go to college, will be having to pay some amount of student debt. Your average college student will be paying for several years after their education. But the hope is that the degree they maintain from that will help them pay off their loans. And I guess because it's such a strenuous schedule that the education pays for itself. And on a similar topic, youth playing contact sports. Recently, with the movie Concussion coming out starring Will Smith, it has brought more to the light the issues and dangers of playing contact sports. Recently, it has been discovered that NFL players from the 60s, the 70s, and even recently the 80s have a disease which is similar to Alzheimer's, which their brain has deteriorated over time because of the multiple hits they've taken. Now that conversation is segued into youth sports, because your brain still is developing until the age of 26. So some people have argued that kids shouldn't be playing that because that's the time when the development is really strong. What's your guys' take on this very important topic?
Well, like you said, 60s, 70s, 80s, that's when they're discovering this. And basically the helmets back then were like plastic. So technology is advancing greatly. And, Virginia Tech, they came up with a 5-star system to rate helmets. And that's put like an arms race in the helmets. So people are, these companies, they are generating newer and better helmets each year. And I feel like the game is getting safer and safer with the new rules. So I feel like today, youth should be able to play if they choose to. It should be an option. They should know the risk, and if they want to play, they should be able to.
Mr. Kogis, your thoughts?
I think there's a certain amount of risks that you take in any sort of activity. Every time you get in a car, you could get in a car accident, but it doesn't mean that
You're not going to drive.
not drive where we go. Kids ride bikes, and that's dangerous in itself, right there. And I think you have to make the decision whether you want to be here for a good time or a long time.
Mr. Ryan, finishing it up.
I mean, I agree with what Ty was saying on how, especially with football, they are making upgrades to helmets and other equipment with the padding. And Kel also with the comment of that, people are, they need to know what they're signing up for, and they are taking risks with getting hit. But I do think kids should be starting youth sports slightly earlier than what they're used to starting them at, because of the continuous blows of the head. And even though there are upgrades and so they're still developing better helmets and equipment, especially in football, you're still getting hit in the head multiple times a game, and that could still lead to brain damage later down the road.
Well, I mean, what could I tell you? What most head injuries in the youth sports are because a child's head is proportionally bigger than their body. So most head injuries to a youth is from their head, like bobbling around in their helmet and hitting the ground when they get tackled. So what companies are doing today, they're making more padding around the neck area to limit the bobbling. So would you still say that kids shouldn't be able to play even if they're stopping what causes the most head injuries to those youth, which is like bobbling of the head?
I mean, you make a good point with that. But I guess I'd have to go with like I said with Cal earlier. I mean, if they're really willing to take that risk and trust the upgraded equipment, then that's fine. If they want to take that risk, that's completely fine. They might have to pay some consequences later down the road. They just don't know it yet.
And I suppose where I come in this topic is, I've played hockey since I was a small boy, and that our people argue is almost as equally as physical as football, just in a different way. With the game you go for longer during your plays or shifts. You're hitting guys at a faster speed than you're in football, but the contact is a different way. And contact for me started when I was in 5th and 6th grade. Now they have the Waha has changed that to 7th and 8th grade. So about the same time kids start playing tackle football. And hockey put an onus on making sure you don't hit the head, because if you do that, garners a 5-minute penalty in youth hockey. And they were very concerned about concussions from an early age. So my parents knew about the consequences. That they realized that it could happen to me, but because the way the equipment I wore and the way I was taught the game, that hopefully I would come out a safer player. I'm sorry, we have to go to a commercial break. When we come back, literature and welcome back to Talk Time. Today.
Just keep going. You doctor that out at the end.
No,
Call it a different.
Oh, hoop rings, right?
Yep. Welcome back to Sports Talk with Michael Prebush. Before the break, I mentioned we would talk about literature and sports. So our first subject matter is a book we all know very well, Hoop Dreams. Now, there are many modern day issues that are touched on throughout the book, such as poverty in sports, doing all you can to get to the top level, family dynamics, how that affects a player. I think the one we should start out with is poverty in sports. In today's society, the media has made it seem is that if you're a low-income kid from the projects, if you do well enough in basketball or football, that you're able to go pro. Because there's a lot of stories that we've seen of a player from next to nothing going pro and getting, ushering his family into financial stability. But as the statistics show, that's near impossible for that to happen. So do you think that the media should take some sort of responsibility in showing kids and youth, what actually is going to happen so they can set more realistic goals for their life? Or is it up for the parents or, legal guardians to tell their kids what's up. Mr. Nelson, your thoughts?
Well, I feel like the media portrays that very wrongly. It's very hard to get into to come up and be a college basketball player, get a scholarship, and go play Division I ball. But I feel like they should show the reality of it, because a lot of kids out there are striving to do that, and it's great that they're working hard for it, but they should really be focusing on like schoolwork and like real education, because even after like the pros, if they made it, there's they still got to find work after that, because you're not going to be able to play ball for the rest of your life.
Mr. Coaches?
Yeah, I do think that the parents need to really take charge and make sure that education is a priority, because I mean, for most people it's a dream. That's exactly what it is, and they will never ever get to the next level. And they might be able to, like for these young men, they were able to lift them into a private school with better education than they get under normal circumstances. But that's not the case for most people, and I think that's when the parents have to step in and make sure that they're focusing on school and not sports, so that they have a future beyond playing basketball or whatever sport.
Mr. Ryan, additional thoughts?
I mean, I do believe that the parents should, really show their kids what the real truth is, and I think Ty put it on the spot well. It is extremely difficult to play a professional sport and make all that money each year, and to be the best, you have to put in the hard work, the training, and and all that preparation, and not a lot of people have time for that, I don't feel. And in addition, with the media, I think they do make it seem like anyone can make it to the pros. But I mean, obviously later in life, when you get to the high school level and you play school sports, especially when you're falling back behind of your peers in a particular sport, you then realize that going into Division I college and playing a sport, and eventually going to the pros, whatever sport that might be, isn't all that fun and games.
I guess my take on this is somewhere right in the middle. I'm a firm believer in that sports drive success, especially in high school. Our coaches put onus on your academics first, sports second. So that if you are passionate about playing a sport in high school, your academics would drive your success in sports. Because if you slack in the classroom, you wouldn't be able to play. And the same goes for if you would like to become a college athlete. In reality, there's a lot of schools, at the junior college level or D3 level, that if you're just some person who likes playing, you would have a decent shot at least almost making the team. And then you'd still get a great education there, and still be playing college sports, which is how a lot of people make that dream become a reality. But then on the flip side, most people need to realize that, after high school, you're done playing sports, because there's a large portion of America's youth, go on to college or vocational career and then go on with their lives and maybe play a recreational sport. So that it's important in high school and in college to find something you're good at and something you can make money with to have a very successful life. Because if you just focus entirely on sports as your way out of it, you're going to be working at McDonald's or some very low level job that requires not a lot of training or experience, and you're going to realize, wow, I wish I had worked harder. And an example of this would be my father once worked at a job site with a man by the name of Chuck Bellin, who played for Wisconsin Badgers as an offensive lineman and was drafted by the Los Angeles Rams. He played a total of 6 games in the NFL spanning 3 years, and then completely tore his ACL and MCL in his left knee. After having reconstructive surgery, he tried to go at it in Europe and nothing worked out. So he is now an electrician, which isn't a terrible occupation to have, but had he stayed his full years at Wisconsin, he probably could be on a better path to success. So I guess that kind of puts things into perspective, for everyday people, because he made it to that step, made it to the pros, but then faltered off.
And I do believe that the media I mean, the media likes to they like to tell people what they want to hear, and everyone likes to hear the
Right.
story about a rags to riches. You know, you don't want to listen to about the guy that had the best quarterback coach since he was 6 and made it to the college and played college ball, and that was it. That just doesn't make for as good a story.
Another topic prevalent throughout the book was family dynamics in sports. We look at one player, Arthur Agee, who his father wasn't always around. He, earlier in Arthur's life, he was a drug dealer in and out of prison, petty crimes, and wasn't always the best father figure, so it was mostly his mother taking care of him. And the other character focused on the story was William Gates, who he ended up not spending much time with his family because he was living with his out of the house sister, which was closer to the school which he was attending. So which begs the question: would these young men's lives been any different had their family dynamic been mom and dad at home, with maybe a brother or sister supporting them? Because with Arthur's situation with having a single mom, she's the sole source of income in the house. She has to worry about every responsibility that both parents would have to take care of, and he had to help out around the house. And with William, he wasn't seeing his parents much at all because he was with his sister, who was essentially his mother, even though it was his sister. So he was missing out on that too. So how important do you believe a family dynamic is in a youth, not only growing up, but going through high school and playing sports? Mr. Ryan, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, especially in high school, I think having a more stable home is quite important in terms of success in sports. And my experience, I'm very fortunate to have, like I said, very stable home, mom and dad. Dad introduced me to the majority of sports, and I was able to stay in them for up to my junior year of high school, and I was very thankful to have all those years of sports, even though there's now like intramurals and stuff like that. But it's a lot. I think it's a lot harder to succeed with an unstable home, like you saw, with Arthur, with his dad not there, while during his first years at St. Joseph, he was getting in trouble, and he really wasn't performing that well at St. Joseph. But then later on, when his dad came back, transferred to Marshall, and because then his parents got a lot more into church and religion, and it kind of changed their family around, and he ended up being really successful at Marshall, and ended up making a good playoff run in his senior year, I believe.
Mr. Nelson, your thoughts?
There's one scene in the book that really sticks out to me with Arthur. It was when he was at the park and he's playing basketball with his friends. His dad comes down to the park, and Arthur knows his dad's a drug dealer, and he just doesn't want to see his dad like that, though. And he talks about it in his head how it angers him and it frustrates him and stresses him out. And right then and there, his dad walks away, and he sees his dad doing a drug deal, and that really it just puts stress on kids, because there's a lot of young kids out there that have families that are like that, and I feel like that's just it's not good, because these kids, they're not doing good in school. I mean, if they are, good for them, because they're keeping their head, they're strong, and I feel like if they had a full support system, it'd be better. But even if some kids who have full support systems don't always do that well in school, it's just kind of a self-desire thing. You have to want to do good in school, is what I'm saying. And I feel like Arthur started out not wanting to. He was struggling in school, class clown, but I feel like towards the end he was starting to get it together.
Mr. Kojas, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think when you have a 2-parent home and the parents are in the house, there's more of an emphasis on education. That they are student athletes. Education needs to come first, and when there's no parent figure telling you when you need to buckle down and do what you're supposed to be doing, that tends to get away. These athletes were tremendously talented, and they were able to kind of make a career out of their athletic ability, but more often than not, that's not going to be the case. And to make sure that education is the priority over sports is more important.
And for me, of that situation through the novel, I really sympathize with William, because he was making a huge sacrifice. Both his mother and his father were living in the same household, but it would have added an extra 2.5 hours, 3 hours some days to his commute to school. So he made the sacrifice for the sport and for a better education too at St. Joe's to live with his sister and her husband slash boyfriend. Think about that. Your parents are together, and you're away from them for most of the year. Throughout the book, he always talked about how he wanted to, see his sister, see his friends from back at his old house, but he never could because he didn't have the opportunity. Because if he wasn't at basketball practice or at home studying, he was paying off of his student loans from the private school by acting as a janitor at the schools, which they gave some underprivileged students the opportunities to pay for it that way. So that means that he was clearly dedicated to the sport. He was successful in school, very driven. His sister helped him out with that, but he made that sacrifice of leaving his family essentially. In a sense, going away to school. As most kids do for college, he was doing that for high school. So thankfully, that transitioned to a successful career for him. And he's well off today. But I'm just thankful that he was able to do that throughout. Now, understanding that every one of us has done some extensive research into a particular novel with different overlaying themes throughout them. So through this portion of sports and literature, I'm going to give the floor to each one of you, and you're going to sort of detail what themes these novels had and how you could relate those to our talk show today. Mr. Kogis?
Well, I read Curveball, and the book really focused on cybermetrics and how it kind of progressed throughout the years of baseball, and how in the 90s, or in the 80s actually, there's very few people were really doing that. But as it progressed throughout the 90s, the smaller market baseball teams really kind of realized that was the best way. They needed that in order to compete with the bigger teams, and that kind of transitioned into even on the business end of it, the statistics and progress throughout there, how it kind of changed not only baseball but other sports and business throughout America.
Just so our viewers know, what is the definition of cybermetrics?
It's I guess I don't know.
All right, that's okay. Mr. Nelson, your novel.
My novel was called Outside Shot. It was about this high school team. They won 3 state championships in a row consecutively. The big theme in that book was kind of like they had an off year after that, and they had like this big weight on their shoulders, and it kind of like showed in depth of like what it's like to be an athlete, really like in a successful tradition rich program, and like I kind of connected it with like Monona Grove football, like coming off our state championship year and our junior year, there was a bunch of weight on our shoulder, and we didn't really like meet our goals, our expectations, and like that year was kind of like it was just a stressful year in a way, kind of, because we're trying to fight and prove people that we're still like this state championship caliber team, but we really weren't, and that's kind of what my book was about. It's just this team, they're struggling, and everybody around them's doubting them, and it kind of just gives in depth of how tradition rich sports are, and even at the high school level, and how much of an effect they can have on kids.
Mr. Ryan, your novel.
So my novel was Welcome to the Terror Dome, and it's by Dave Zirin, who we did an assignment on one of his articles earlier in class, and what I thought was a book about the politics surrounding the Hurricane Katrina victims in New Orleans, and using the Superdome, home of the Saints, as their shelter, and having the government kind of getting on their case. It was really just about the overall politics of sports, and some of the politics that we know, obviously, we know about Jackie Robinson, first African American player in the MLB, as well as Roberto Clemente, who was like one of the first Latino players, and it also relates to like the homework assignment we had, pages 37 to 39, when it talked about how athletes went against the norms of society, and how obviously Clemente and Robinson broke the racial barriers, and that's why they welcomed a lot more integration into baseball. And then also in a past World Cup, Zidane, I think from the French national team, headbutted a member of the Italian team, Materazzi. After Zidane claims Materazzi called it was either Zidane's mom or sister a whore, and a lot of people thought, including Zidane, obviously, that he thought it was right to headbutt Materazzi, to basically stand his ground on what Materazzi said about his family, basically threatening his family. And basically, it raises a question of, should athletes speak up about, these social issues? And in my opinion, they should, because, think about it, you're an athlete, everyone knows your name, especially in like the U.S., and, you have all that power, and I think if athletes speak up about issues, more awareness will be raised to address those issues to the public.
And to wrap things up in sort of a topic we can all connect to, I read a biography on Pete Rose, and this biography focused on the scandal surrounding him. As we all know, he is the all-time hits leader, at-bat leader. Has the highest on-base percentage of any professional major leaguer. By all accords, he should be in Cooperstown, at MLB's Hall of Fame. But after his playing career is over, he was re-signed by the Cincinnati Reds as a team manager. After 3 seasons as the Reds manager, it was discovered that he was betting for his team, illegally. And the MLB has a strict rule against players or coaches taking bets for or against any team throughout the organization. So the MLB then decided that Rose would never be allowed into Cooperstown. And it was very interesting to see that, everybody around Pete Rose left a better person. He left a mark on every organization he touched. May it be a player, manager, or playing against them. Most players enjoyed playing against Pete Rose because he was an awesome guy to be around. To this day, every year when they induct more people into the MLB Hall of Fame, he is very frequent around the Hall of Fame, meeting fans, meet and greets, signings, pictures. Whereas some players have shied away from that, even at his old age. I personally believe that Pete Rose should have been inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player, because the actions that he took as a manager, while illegal, were as a manager, not as a player. So that he should be banned from entering Cooperstown as a manager, but as a player, he did nothing wrong. If anything, it was during an era where PEDs and performance-enhancing drugs were very prevalent. Welcome back to Sports Nightly. Now, before the break, I mentioned we would be talking about entertainment and sports, more specifically, movies. One movie that comes to mind is the movie Slapshot, which chronicles a minor league hockey team in a fictional town in northeastern America, and their rise from being the worst team in the league to a championship caliber team. And the methods that they chose to go about doing this were questionable. They would just take out the team's best player, and then after injuring most of the team, would then go in and win. But at the end of the movie, the team realized that that was the improper way to win a game, maybe hockey or another sport. So, that brings a question. Hockey in itself is a somewhat violent sport, with, the object of the game is to take a carbonized piece of rubber and shoot it at a player who is defending a net. Throughout the movie, we saw several instances of violence throughout. What was your take on the team's methods in this movie, and should the youth of America think that is a good thing, bad thing, somewhere in the middle? Tell me where you're at. Mr. Nelson, your thoughts.
Well, I thought it was disgraceful because honestly, I don't see any NHL team doing that today. That's just crazy. That's a movie, Hollywood. But, I guess you could say violence in sports, like in the movie, the one player on the Chiefs, he hit another player with his hockey stick, and then later in the movie you found out a little kid wanted to be like him and hit his friend with a hockey stick. So that just kind of shows like how violence in sports can affect the society and the youth and how they want to be like their role model. And if their role model is doing violent things, they're going to do that too.
Mr. Kojas.
Yeah, I think it really shows how much sports plays a role in society, and kids will imitate what they see on TV. But more importantly, just how big of an impact. I mean, every radio interview they did, people would be listening to them. They'd be hanging on every word they were talking about. And after they won the league championship, I mean, the whole city of Charleston they gathered around the city, and it was a shining moment for the city as a whole.
Mr. Ryan, your thoughts on the movie?
I don't really think kids should be looking obviously at the violent part of Slapshot. Yes, it was used for for a cheap team to get to the championship, but obviously, as we all know, it's not right to act like that, as we know. But instead, what kids should look at is how everyone kind of came around the team, and yeah, it was because of their violent acts, but just think about how well a sports team could go the right way of things and perform well and play the right way, and how that could have people behind them.
I guess the portion of the movie that I took away the most was that we learned in the beginning that their town, the mill of some sort, was getting shut down, and a large portion of the town's population was losing their jobs. So I think inadvertently what the team did was give them something to look forward to, give them some positive in their life. If they were going to put on a show for the fans by beating the crap out of the opposing team, some points where the team had a forfeit, and so be it. I'm not saying their methods were the most, the most sincere thing to do, but they were playing for the town of Charleston, the Charlestown Chiefs. They are representing their town, giving their town something to cheer for. Because in a time when most people would be very sad and depressed, they were cheering for something. And that's all the time we have for today. I would again like to thank our special guest for tonight, Mr. Ty Merrick Nelson, Mr. Calvin Kojas, and Mr. Colton Ryan. And as always, I'm Michael Prewish, and this has been Sports Nightly.